China realized that the actual competitor is USA, they decided to close in with Russia, mainly to exploit their arms technology and natural resources. America started going India, the only big power in Asia that can actually stand up to China. The autocratic, totalitarian, communist, closed China has been seen as a threat to free world and the democratic system of the world. But I must tell you that Russia always wanted to be part of the Western system. Europeans are not so much worried about the Chinese because they think China is a little far away from them. Russia and China have a serious divergences. So Russians are very upset about that, and Russians have been accusing China as recently as last year also of intellectual property theft. Russia is also threatening to become closer to Pakistan. I must tell you, all the arms that have been sold by Russia to Pakistan till today are much, much less than a single weapon of S-400 system that we are going to buy. There's no smooth sailing for Taliban either, if I may use the word. If anybody thinks that Taliban is a great friend of Pakistan or other way around, I think the Pakistan is also very worried. Large number of American troops, over 50,000 that are being withdrawn, and many weapons platforms that get released from Afghanistan will thereafter be used to strengthen US forces in Indo-Pacific. Also, China has moved in their security personnel to secure their assets, but they are arm twisting Pakistan all the time, and Pakistan is actually very, very uncomfortable.
Hello and welcome to Dev Talks. This is a very special episode with an aviator par excellence, Air Marshal Anil Chopra, PVSM, AVSM, VM, VSM, a fighter pilot, a test pilot, a pioneer of the Mirage 2000 fleet, who commanded a Mirage 2000 squadron and the Flight Test Center, aircrafts and system testing establishment of the Indian Air Force. He was the team leader of India's MiG-21 Bison upgrade, which went to Russia. He commanded operational air bases both in the western and the eastern sectors. He was the head of the Indian Air Force in Jammu and Kashmir. Retired as the head of the HR, Human Resources, as Air Officer Personnel, and was also responsible for education and training within the force. He's been a member of the Armed Forces Tribunal at the Lucknow branch and a member of the Executive Council of Jawaharlal Nehru University. He's also been an advisor to the Committee of the National Green Tribunal. In addition to the 4 presidential awards, he's also a recipient of the Gandhi Family Peace Medal for his work in Jammu and Kashmir. He has over 400 published articles on air power strategy and has written extensively on national security issues facing India today. He's a part of the Center of Air Power Studies, and his articles, I must say, are well worth a read for us to understand the Indian Air Force's perspective about what's happening with us. Thank you, sir, for joining me to discuss the changing world order in front of us.
Thank you, Ali. Thank you for inviting me to this discussion. Always a pleasure to interact and share our views with the masses on important subjects which you get people to listen to. Yes.
Thank you, sir. So, as far as the world order is concerned, the last time the world order changed around was at the end of the Second World War. Again, we saw it changing at the fall of the Soviet Union. The Chinese have today created a situation that the world order is changing once again. The Chinese would have hoped to death that the world order is in their favor. Unfortunately, we see things moving the other way around. I'd like to open this particular discussion with US-China relations as per se, because the entire world is kind of revolving in the middle of these two giants having a battle. Where and how do you see this relationship going forward?
Ari, let me start with a little bit on Soviet-Russia-China relations, because that has a direct bearing in what is happening to US-China relations. The complex geopolitics of the world has been reshaping nearly every 2 decades. So Russia and China are 2 giant neighbors that occupy the largest mass of Asia. They have over 4,000 kilometers of border between them. Traditionally, they have been antagonistic societies, but often chose the marriage of convenience. Their relations in post-World War II era have been vacillating between two extremes. Currently, they are close. They are unequal. Their relationship is unreal, if I may say, and it is complex. Now, during the peak of communism, Mao was very unhappy, especially after Stalin went. That means Khrushchev took over, about Soviets being soft on communism. Now, Russia's stand on India also accelerated the split between these two countries. There were also serious differences between these two countries on Vietnam and later on in Afghanistan. But after the breakup of the Soviet Union and now more powerful China decided to close in, because now when China realized that the actual competitor is USA, they decided to close in with Russia mainly to exploit their arms technology and natural resources. So China needs Russian hydrocarbons for the moment. Russia is important for China's Silk Route projects in Central Asia and to Europe. Russia and China are buddies with the strategic treaties. Also, they are coordinating with each other in the world bodies like the United Nations, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, BRICS, and Russia, India, China groupings. Putin and Xi Jinping are both authoritarian leaders. So we will talk a little more about what will be the future state of relationships. And I come to your question now about the China-US relations. USA did not formally recognize People's Republic of China for a very long time. Really, 30 years after founding, it had not recognized it. Instead, the US maintained diplomatic relations with Taiwan. US fought China and Soviet Union together in 1950 Korean War. It ended as a stalemate. It worsened US-China relations for times to come, the Korean War. China also supported Vietnam against USA in Vietnam War. And when China became nuclear armed, and that puts limits on the USA, till 1971, US-China relations were uniformly hostile, if I may use that word. USA always was clear that China was more militant and more dangerous than Soviet Union. Seeing the China-Soviet split, and also when China realized after USA left Vietnam that USA was more worried about Soviets, so then they made attempts to get closer to the US, and then came the ping pong diplomacy. We all are aware of how in 1972 Nixon visited China. USA acknowledged that there is only one China, and that Taiwan is part of that China. And this is at the peak of their good relations as they were evolving. But in many issues like Korea, Vietnam, Israel, USA and China were unable to reach a common understanding. Now, USA-China military cooperation began in 1979. Americans' arms sales were allowed to Chinese. US changed its classification of China to a friendly developing nation, thereby increasing the amount of technology that and armaments they could be sold. Chinese demands for advanced technology from US were not always met, though, because the US didn't want to open all its cards. But it was Reagan who was the first president who, in his initial years of office, saw deterioration started between US and China relations due to the president's vociferous anti-communism views. Also, there were differences of opinion between the two in Israel-Palestine conflict, also in Falkland Wars. We know even today the Chinese are talking about Argentina should own Falkland Islands. The differences increased after the suppression of the in the Tiananmen protests. A lot of trade restrictions were imposed, and Washington started supporting Taiwan, including with arms. By the turn of this century, it was becoming very clear that China was becoming big economically and militarily. China was also upset that Obama had chosen to have Asia Pacific defense strategy, which later on became Indo-Pacific strategy. Also, around that time during Obama's tenure, Quad was conceived and has become big today. America started wooing India, the only big power in Asia that can actually stand up to China. And knowing fully well that India and China have had, boundary disputes, so the Americans started befriending India. Uh, China, ever since Xi has come up and become all powerful, has been dismissive of American complaints about the cyber security and other issues. But China's claims in South China Sea and rapid island building brought to open the Chinese expansionist plans as American friends in the region were looking for leads from Washington. So that is a time where the relationship has sort of started deteriorating one hell of a lot. And I must tell you that the world is extremely concerned about Belt and Road Initiative. Now, Trump came down more heavily with punitive tariffs. Luckily, Biden is following up with no less, emphasis and gusto. The eager human rights issues in Xinjiang are being talked of by everybody in the world, including many European countries have started talking about it. The autocratic, totalitarian, communist, closed China has been seen as a threat to free world and democratic system of the world. Now, this is very important, and America has for some time been treating the world as unipolar and looking at Asia as multipolar. But China wants the world to be multipolar and Asia to be unipolar, and that is the grand strategy that is evolving between the two sides. China is today fast catching up with America in air and space and maritime, becoming a maritime power, though it is still far behind USA. Remember, the Chinese are still rolling out their second aircraft carrier. The Americans have 12 of them. Currently, at least 2 of them are in the region very close to China. Also, Chinese are becoming leaders in cyber, hypersonics, unmanned systems, some other technologies. So this issue between China and US and the world that is going to follow the US way of thinking is going to carry on for some time. Yes.
So it's very interesting that you picked up the topic of the Russians to start with, because at the end of it, one actually can't help realize the fact that the American focus towards Russia is way far ahead of what is required. I think you and I were having a chat a while ago about the American push towards Crimea and stuff like that, not realizing Russian national interest there as well. There are two parts that I'd like to ask you. Is America focusing too much on Russia and leaving China on the side to kind of play its own game? And how does Russia fit into the current US-China relations, looking at the fact that Mr. Biden and the Russian President Vladimir Putin recently had a meeting as well, sir?
Yeah, Adi, I have been in Russia for 4.5 years as the leader of the MiG-21 upgrade project, and I have watched the Russians very, very closely. A very interesting fact I must tell you, that if you look at the Russian flag, the main emblem, there are 2 eagles facing in opposite directions. So the joke in Russia was that Russia's the main landmass is in Asia. But all its major cities like Moscow, St. Petersburg, earlier Kiev, all were in Europe. So Russia has always been confused whether they are Asian power, where bulk of their landmass is, or are they a Western power, a European power. But I must tell you that Russia always wanted to be part of the Western system. The culture they wanted to adopt was European. USA used the initial transition after the Soviet Union broke up to expand influence in Warsaw Pact countries, which Russia was a little worried, but initially they were sorting out their economic mess. But however, once Putin consolidated power, for Russia it was very important to get back some footholds in these old Warsaw Pact countries. It was not possible to get back most of them. But what was very critical is, if you see the landmass, their major warm water area is Black Sea, because in the Arctic side, half of the year it's frozen, and then they have, of course, in the Pacific, even Vladivostok side, it is all very cold. So Black Sea was very important because this is where their warm water fleet resides. So even though Ukraine was becoming friendly to the West, for Russia, it was very important to engineer a takeover of Crimea. And this is well known to the Western world. And I think that if I was in place of the Russians, I would want to achieve what they did. They organized a sort of a coup, and then thereafter a military takeover of Crimea. Now, USA and West was upset because they were trying to get Ukraine in their fold, but so therefore they immediately imposed sanctions. These sanctions were extremely worrying for the Russians. Another thing I must mention, that Europeans are not so much worried about the Chinese because they think China is a little far away from them. They find that Russia is sitting next door to them, and therefore there is this concern of the Europeans, and the Europeans have been telling Americans that you keep engaging with China, but for us Russia is important, and therefore we want you to be part of this system. So that is the basis on which these guys. But I must tell you, Russia and China have a serious divergences. Now, these divergences are important to understand in the long term. Even if today, if the Americans were to even give a slightest indication to Russia, they can be wooed away from China. Russia still wants to be closer to West. It distrusts China. It cannot have a huge, powerful China sitting next to them. But the West, as I said, has pushed them into the Chinese arms. Russia is unhappy that China first flooded their cities with cheap Chinese goods and killed whatever little artifact industry of their own. Even their own crystal and other industry has been killed by the Chinese by having imitations which have been pushed in. China is a reverse engineer. We all know all the weapons and have become independent on that count and are now eating away export markets for arms in Asia, Africa, Latin America. So Russians are very upset about that, and Russians have been accusing China as recently as last year also of intellectual property theft of a large range of military technology. So the Chinese. Now, Russia is also conscious that oil as a resource of energy is fast losing significance. In the long run, would lose huge revenues and export dependence. The Chinese, the only thing the Chinese are looking for from Russia at this moment is this, and therefore is the natural resources. A powerful China on Russia's border is not in Russia's interest, and if the Americans really want, they can woo away Russia away from China anytime.
I agree with you 100%. So as a matter of fact, if you read the Chinese deployments, and there was a study done by the Belfer Center on this, the Chinese air deployments against India, and they very categorically mentioned that the Chinese will have to keep almost 1/3 of their forces which are faced towards India to keep Russia counterbalanced, because the Chinese internally don't trust Russians to kind of maintain the border status quo in case the Chinese are involved in some other skirmish or a war or anything like that. I agree with you, sir. As a matter of fact, sir, some people also do believe that India has a big role to play in this whole US-Russia relationship, having good relations between both the countries. There are thoughts which are suggesting that India could play a ice-breaking role to get the Russians on towards the West, so that everybody could then focus their attention towards China, which is more required. What are your opinions on this, sir?
This India, Russia, US triangle is a little complex. A few days back I was attending a webinar on which was Indo-US webinar, a high level where the foreign ministers were involved. I had posed this similar question on there, and there was a general consensus that this is too complex. India is too small in this triangle, because the Americans are being on this issue being sort of controlled or advised by the Europeans. But I must also tell you there are other complexities. Now, currently, India is buying a lot of arms from US also, but still 60% of Indian armed forces are of Russian origin. India is still under Katsat threat for buying S-400 air defense system from Russia. This threat is, despite at higher levels in the government, some assurances are being given to India that no, that waiver will come. But there are a lot of congressmen who are questioning this, because that may delay some of these sensitive technologies coming to us. Now, as I said, Indian armed forces still 60% of Russian origin. The situation is not going to change in a hurry. Means you can be sure that at least for next 20, 25 years, if not more, we will continue to be having an umbilical cord link with the Russians. USA fully understands this reality, the present administration and the one before, and that process will be slow, and only time will tell how this will evolve. With China taking away Russian markets, Russia very much needs India. Now, India is a huge market for Russia. I must tell you, some people sometimes say that Russia is also threatening to become closer to Pakistan. I must tell you, all the arms that have been sold by Russia to Pakistan till today are much, much less than a single weapon of S-400 system that we are going to buy. So that is the differential of equation between us and Russia vis-a-vis Pakistan, and therefore Russia needs us as much as we need them, or if not more. Russia is happy that India is becoming closer to USA. That is quite natural. But they also understand that India's concerns about China, and so this kind of things will evolve. USA needs India to counterbalance China, so they might tacitly threaten us, but they will, still have to do this balancing. And notwithstanding USA-Russia relations are dictated, as I said, by European allies, India can be of little help in this triangle, though it should continue to try. In the long term, USA themselves will realize at some point and get Russia in their fold, I think, and it will not be so difficult for them to do it, yes.
I hope so, sir, because that's one of the things which is required, and the Europeans need to, I think a little broader in their perspective. But the whole thing is, when you hear NATO leaders saying that I don't share a border with China, it's not much of a concern to me, that kind of puts a hindrance in this whole line of thought. I agree with you, sir. So, but when one talks about US, when talks about Russia in the same sentence, there's one thought that comes into everybody's mind, and that is Afghanistan. Afghanistan seems to be becoming the next battlefield again of the superpowers playing game there. So, one can actually say that the great game is emerging again. Russians are on the side watching. They've got their own security interests. They've got their own, interest to stop the narcotics to come into their own backyard in the Central Asian republics. But one actually sees the Chinese footprint trying to, enter into Afghanistan in a very large way. Do you think that the Chinese are doing this to safeguard their own national security in one part? And what else do you think are the Chinese motives to get into Afghanistan?
This area, Baluchistan, Afghanistan, is a very, very complex area. I must tell you, if you look back in history, great powers of all times have suffered defeat in Afghanistan, or in this general area, the West, Pakistan. A great British Empire could not control that region, we know. The Soviets failed, and now the Americans have had to withdraw. So it is very complex. There are no conventional standard targets there. There are people with high-headedness. There is drugs. There is underworld operating. All kinds of things are happening. So it is not easy to control places where nobody is worried about dying. You control societies where people believe in some laws. So it's complex. Taliban are, with this withdrawal of the Americans, Taliban are already gaining control. Taliban will also require financial support from someone. They will, they can't just manage on their own. There are group rivalries within Taliban. We have seen in the past, whether ISIS, Al Qaeda, they are different groups. Each has their own agenda, own regional aspirations. So it is not so simple and straightforward. If you want, there's no smooth sailing for Taliban either, if I may use the word. And look at the other place. All the countries in the neighborhood are concerned. Everybody. If anybody thinks that Taliban is a great friend of Pakistan or other way around, I think the Pakistan is also very worried. They've just used them for own advantage, and the Taliban may jetson Pakistan, in times to come. Pakistan will see more secessionist activities in Balochistan the moment Taliban has full control of Afghanistan. Pakistan is already in a financial mess. If they help Taliban, they are in trouble. They will get into the FATF blacklist. Pakistan is so therefore very worried. And Pakistan also knows that the elected government will be shaken up. The military will be worried if some elements of Taliban start exercising greater controls in parts of Pakistan. China is also very worried. Taliban may export fundamentalism to the already troubled Xinjiang, where the Chinese are trying to convert the Muslims, Uyghurs into the Han culture. We all have read, how they are having indoctrination camps, and they are like, jails to brainwash these guys. The Chinese are happy with was happy that when USA was embroiled in Afghanistan, it suited them. Big chunk of American money, military was sitting in Afghanistan, which suited China. China was getting a little more freedom in South China Sea. Large number of American troops, over 50,000 that are being withdrawn, and many weapons platforms that get released from Afghanistan will thereafter be used to strengthen US forces in Indo-Pacific. So China was always wanting that the Americans should stay here stuck in mud, and that was suiting. Iran has ideological differences with Taliban. Everybody, the sheikdoms around this area are also not very happy because of their own countries. If Taliban can generate unrest in any of these countries controlled by sheikhs and the ruling families, they're all worried. So the point I'm trying to make is, they think that China will have a cakewalk. You must remember that Islam and communism normally cannot go together. Pakistan is stuck with China. Otherwise, they can't go together. The Chinese will finish anybody who is not a communist. So, knowing all this, there are concerns. Now, look, come back to India. As far as India is concerned, it had been engaged in developmental diplomacy, if I may use that word, not involved local power politics. We were trying to win the hearts of the Afghan people by giving them aid, which was in terms of projects that will improve the quality of life. Indians are respected by the people of Afghanistan. Both Taliban know about India. They know that we don't meddle with their politics. So do the common man in Afghanistan streets. India has back channels with all factions. I don't think we need to be worried too much. Things will evolve. We need to just watch very, very closely. And there are many forces that at play. It's not surely a cakewalk for China. Not at all. Yeah.
Absolutely, sir. As a matter of fact, their construction or reactivation of their base in Tajikistan, close to the Vakan corridor, they're trying to push for that road to connect with their G314, which is the highway coming down from Kashgar into the POK region. They've been trying to do that so that they can keep a control over that area. And one really wonders, because the news says that the Chinese are, very well welcome there. And I think you brought out the point very, very clearly that the Chinese themselves are very worried about this entire region, as the Americans used to give them a certain amount of buffer. That's a very, very important point one must understand while looking at the geopolitics of this region. So, one of the biggest things that India today talks about is the collusion of the Chinese and the Pakistanis against India. A lot of times it seems like the Pakistanis, which is the puppet, and the master is the Chinese. Uh, Money is obviously coming in from China to trouble create some trouble within India and through via Pakistan. How do you see this situation going forward? Because at the end of it, I think it was Hillary Clinton who said that if you keep snakes in your backyard, it's going to bite you too. So Pakistan is feeling the brunt of that. How do you see the situation going forward?
Yeah, it's a strange relationship of convenience. It's a case of enemy being a friend. That kind of a relationship. As I said, that Islam and communism can never be friends. But since partition, Pakistan has been trying to wrest Kashmir from India. Pakistan knows that India is too powerful, it's too big economically, militarily. But after 1962 India-China war, Pakistan sensed that India was the weaker of the two and chose to befriend China as an insurance against India. They ceded nearly 5,000 square kilometers of territory, sorted out their border issues by give and take. They got arms support in return. China helped Pakistan set up their arms industry. The cooperation was most significant in aerospace. Today, Pakistan Armed Forces, nearly 60% are of Chinese origin. Some of the successes of the cooperation are the joint ventures of JF-17 fighter aircraft, the Al-Khalid main battle tank, the Karakoram 8 trainer aircraft. China also helped Pakistan in some missile and nuclear programs. Shipbuilding, submarine building, all design and development work is going on in China, and Pakistan share is 50% basically of metal cutting and production. You can say it's like a license production kind of a relationship. But a much bigger area of cooperation thereafter has been the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPEC, and the Gwadar port, which is a strategic port. China has made deep inroads into Pakistan through this project, and it is fast becoming a huge debt trap. Debt trap because the amount of money. See, China doesn't give aid; they give loan. Their loans are not cheap like the Japanese or some other countries give. Their loans have got a big interest element. A country like Pakistan and many other poor countries who cannot service that debt interest, they ultimately have to sell part of their sovereignty by leasing of some strategic assets, like in the case of Pakistan, they had to lease Gwadar port to China. Also, China has moved in their security personnel to secure their assets, but they are arm twisting Pakistan all the time, and Pakistan is actually very, very uncomfortable. Another important area of cooperation is the regular joint military exercises, with which they are being able to increase the interoperability between the armed forces. This is of concern to India. India is conscious of the risk of the two-front war. If Pakistan and India were to have some conflict, even under the nuclear overhang, I'm telling you, China will not come militarily. But if China starts a conflict with India, which also I feel unlikely under the nuclear scenario, Pakistan can be foolhardy and they could sort of jump in. India has factored all these type of contingencies. So China-Pakistan nexus, as is the word that I use, is being factored by Indian security establishment and the military. And one is watching. I will ask you a simple question. Have you ever heard of a Pakistani general or politician settling down in China? They all settle down in US, London, some Western countries. Where do they invest their dollars? China is economically a big country. Has a penny been invested? They'll all invest in UAE, Dubai, they will invest it in America. So this relationship is of convenience, and in the long term, it is very much possible for the West to woo Pakistan away from China, but for the moment, that's not happening. Yeah.
So, today, one notes is that I'd like to go on to air power, which is obviously, going to be your expertise. Today, one notes that air power and its use, and this came out very, very glaringly during the India-China standoff, is that Indian air power could provide for a deterrence for the Chinese to make moves. And if you analyze, and I'm sure you'd agree with me, the Chinese moves over the past few months in terms of strengthening, one, their anti-aircraft defenses, and two, their air infrastructure around the line of actual control, emphasizes what I'm trying to say. Is there a need within India to look at the changing outlook of air power? Do you think there is a requirement for a change today, sir? And where do you see this change going to?
Adi, undoubtedly, the dominance of air power for in any conflict has emerged, has been emerging after World War II, where air power had a huge role to make a difference in the war. There has been a feeling among the major powers that the one who controls the aerospace controls this planet, which is a fact. USA and Russia realized it immediately after World War II, and later China also realized it. And if you see their investments of all these three countries, hugely into space and air systems, because aerospace is impacting every aspect of warfare on surface, subsurface, and of course in the air. To become a military superpower, it's very important that we master the latest technologies and have a viable military industrial complex. For quite some time, we have been very happy to be a licensed production type of a country with HAL taking the design, we pay for the drawings, and then we make on license from the Soviet Union, later on Russia. We have been making a lot of other items are being made today for the Western companies, are also being made based on their drawings. We do the metal cutting and we do the final production because of cheap labor, etc., etc. But of course, we are doing it for absolutely world class standards. But things are changing. Now, I want to highlight this. The LCA program has finally become successful. We are all set to launch into the more advanced variant. We are also working on the 5th generation fighter, the advanced medium combat aircraft called AMCA. India has been very successful in making helicopters. We have got nearly 400 ALH variants flying in India. At least 4 or 5 new variants of the combat helicopter and medium helicopter. They're all on the way. So we are going to be quite all right in helicopters. India built helicopters is going to increase. India has a good missile program covering all areas from surface to surface, surface to air to air, air to surface, including cruise missiles. We are making on our own. We know BrahMos, etc. We all have had a great success. India has also done fairly well in ground radars because we were not worried about the size, so that can't be said about the airborne radars as much. The joint venture route for some of the radars and missile systems with Israel has worked well. So that means joint venture system. Also, similarly, the BrahMos JV with Russians is doing very well. And we are now going to be exporting BrahMos missiles to many countries. That's in the pipeline. The private sector has now come of age. We are making international class aerostructures for many international platforms. Only the merging between the private sector and our own DRDO and HAL is work still in progress. Yes, there are areas that need more work. We need to develop indigenous aircraft engine. Mind you, it is very difficult. There are only 5, 6 major companies of the world making aircraft engines. Even the Chinese are struggling. So this is a tough area. Best for us perhaps will be to have a joint venture. We need to develop modern ISA radars. Presently, we are dependent on Israeli technology, but not a bad idea. But ultimately, we should also have our own capability. For many years, we have been developing trainer aircraft for Indian Air Force. Now we are more or less taking shape. We have already, the Indian Air Force has already given a request for proposal for the basic trainer, the HTT-40. The IZT is also evolving now finally, and we hope this will come through soon. But we are still to develop a transport aircraft of very significance. The SARAS program is still, if I may use the word, floundering. So much more needs to be done. We also need to scale up the production of LCA variants, even if it means we have to give some private companies, some major companies like Tata or L&T or whosoever, to set up another production line for the LCAs. We need to hasten development of UAVs and combat UAVs. We all are hearing about the Jammu attack, but of course that's a very small incident. We shouldn't have any knee-jerk reaction. But UAVs, unmanned is the future, and that's an area we must invest so much more. We keep saying that DRDO is developing this, DRDO is developing. What matters to the country is what actually gets inducted finally into the armed forces. We are doing very well in space-based systems. And there are military applications in terms of reconnaissance, intelligence, communications. We have a GPS, satellite-based GPS system equivalent coming up. So we need to also make advances into newer areas, hypersonic, cyber, electronic warfare technologies, artificial intelligence. Some work is going on, but I think lest we get left behind, there is a need for accelerating work in these technologies. It has to be driven at the highest levels in the country. We need to make private sector strategic partners. Some of these major, indigenous programs, so that the public sector can concentrate on newer designs and new research work. Yeah.
I think that's a very viable answer that you've given, sir. And a lot of people will agree with this, and it is something that we need to look into. So my final question to you: we are looking at a scenario right now where our squadron strength is going to be below 30 for after a really long time, and it's something which is not suitable for an environment like India when we face a twin threat on both our borders. So where and how do you think Indian Air Force now, leaving apart the indigenous development that you've talked about, how do we augment our strength to build up fast? Because I don't think we have the time and comfort to wait for the indigenous production to kick in and then to start, because it's going to take 3 to 5 years, whereas the threat from China is pretty much immediate. How do you think we should go and handle this situation?
Let me tell you what is the way ahead for air power, for Indian Air Force, for India. Firstly, the thin line dividing air and space has already disappeared, and the two domains need to be merged for operational purposes in whatever form it may be done. If you see the Chinese, they have reorganized their strategic forces, and space has become a major domain within the military. We are also in the process. But the future combat will be farther distances because the missile ranges are more, the radar ranges are more, the hypersonic weapons will be more difficult to engage. These weapons could threaten high-value targets like aircraft carriers and large platforms in there. So the type of warfare is changing. Both USA and China are developing stealth bombers. We don't even have a bomber in India for quite some time after we retired the Canberras. More and more missions in future will be unmanned. So there will also be manned-unmanned teaming, which everybody's talking about, and it's being demonstrated by the Americans, Chinese, Russians, and Indians. We have demonstrated that. So as far as IF is concerned, firstly, as you said rightly, we are down to 30 squadrons, and if we don't do something very quickly, the Air Chief just announced a few days back that the MiG Bison squadrons will all retire by 2024. Now, by that time, that means another 3-4 squadrons will go. We are already close to 30. We will go below 30. We can't. What is in the pipeline? The Rafales would have been already factored in. The second squadron is already formed. The only thing in the pipeline immediately in the next 3 years is the LCA production. How much? You'll add another 2, 3 squadrons. The present production is around 12 aircraft. Okay, let's say even if by next year they go up to 16, that's the equivalent of a squadron a year. So in next 3 years, you will add another 3 squadrons. So nothing is going to change. Therefore, we have no choice but to induct for one more time some foreign aircraft. There is an MMRCA proposal for 114 aircraft that's still hibernating, if I may use that word somewhere. We have not even issued a request for proposal. After you issue a request for proposal, it takes some time for them to reply. It takes a period of 5, 6 years to induct aircraft. So we are in a little bit of a crisis situation as far as fighter aircraft is concerned, and I think the country must take the decisions. But I'm sure the people who matter are conscious of this, and the Air Force is keeping them informed. For the size of a country, there is a need for more AWACS. I'm just having 3 AWACS and 7 or 6 flight refuelers. It's too inadequate. Even Pakistan has got more AWACS and small, AWACS. We've got 2 DRDO AWC aircraft. Pakistan has got 8 of the equivalents. So there is a need on this count. Certainly, the AWACS we need to have more. IF is fairly well off in transport and helicopters fleet. We certainly need many more UAVs, especially the combat ones. Also, there is a need to have decent stocking of armaments, more so with China sitting on our border. When I mean by armaments is a lot more cruise missiles or even surface-to-surface missiles, because Chinese are going to use cruise missiles and surface-to-surface missiles in a big way. They have got these H-6 bombers, which can carry 6 cruise missiles, and they will launch from very far range. The bomber itself need not be stationed, though currently they have been seen in Bhutan and Kashgar, but they need not be stationed so close. The Chinese also strong in cyber and electronic warfare capabilities. They have got dedicated electronic warfare aircraft. One H-6 variant, H-6G is the variant which is an electronic warfare, powerful variant. They also have, we have heard about some microwave, weapons being positioned near the border. At least we saw some on the Twitter. Even the MOD report, annual report has mentioned that there were some unconventional looking weapons seen. This is the report which came on 31st December by the Ministry of Defense. But IF trains very well. It trains with modern air forces. IF's morale is extremely high. We have seen so much more combat engagements than Chinese, who haven't seen a war for long, even though they are doing exercises with Pakistan, and they both are exposing each other on some of their weapon systems. So surely more needs to be invested. The current defense budgets of around 2.15% of GDP, which includes the pensions, etc., I think are less, because the modernization gap for all the 3 services, certainly for the Air Force, is behind schedule. The gap is large, and if you really want to, bridge that gap, then we need to perhaps have increase in the defense budget or some outside budget. Allotments may have to be done. But we are proud. The chiefs have been telling us again and again that IF is ready. IF has a plan B. IF will. The Chinese are really worried. The Rafale has made a big difference. Now we have a Rafale squad on both eastern and western front. The Rafale is a game changer, and it has a better ISR radar, it has better weapons, it has better electronic warfare than any aircraft that the Chinese have got. So I think IF is going to do well. IF is going to support the Indian Army in a big way. The combat helicopters, the Chinooks, the CH-17s, and the C-130s, they have been flying up and down to Leh and the Ladakh region. And I think the Chinese are conscious of this. Indian Army has moved another 50,000 troops, as the defense minister, still in Leh. And so it's just a matter of time the Chinese will realize and sort of back off. I wish the Indian Air Force will continue to touch the sky with glory, and we are proud of the air bodies and the great work they are doing. Yes, thank you.
Absolutely, sir. Being a kid from the Indian Air Force, I hope and pray that every day uh,
Yes.
glory is all that we get. Sir, this has been a wonderful discussion. We've gone through pretty much all the burning topics of the day, starting from the US-China relations. You've given us a very good background, starting from Stalin's era, as a matter of fact, Stalin and Mao's era, uh, where how the Russians and Chinese have got a very complicated relationship between themselves, and how the Americans fit into this whole thing. We moved into Afghanistan, where you've actually clearly told us it's not the Chinese backyard as a lot of people make it out to be. It is also that the Chinese are trying to protect themselves and their areas which are vulnerable to terrorism and to separatists, as they call it, in the East Turkestan region, or Xinjiang as it's known. We moved on to talk about the collusion between the Pakistanis and the Chinese and how that needs to be tackled by India. And finally, of course, I couldn't resist myself asking the Air Marshal questions about the Indian Air Force as to where does he see the Indian Air Force going in the next some time, and what we need to do to augment the force into the levels that we require to protect our nation. Sir, this has been a wonderful discussion. Thank you so much for taking the time out. I understand you've been busy with a lot of writing that you do, and I really appreciate this time. I would be sure to disturb you once again for another topic, another day, sir.
Thank you, Ali. It was absolutely a pleasure. Very interesting question, very relevant to both geostrategic geopolitics of the world and especially to the region that we are in and how its things are going to impact. And I hope at the end of our session, some of these issues have got cleared, or at least I have brought in issues and pointers that are slightly not in the public domain sufficiently yet. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely, sir. And I'm grateful to you. Thank you, sir, and Jai Hind.
Jai Hind, and God bless you always. God bless.
Thank you,
Yeah.
sir.